Hello everyone, in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this Kisses beaded Kumihimo bracelet, and it looks like this. So these are all your X's going all the way around, representing your kisses, making it very Valentine's if you want to use it for that. And then obviously the embellishment as well, and along the sides, and I chose to use red bicones to go with the Valentine's theme. You can also choose whatever materials that you want to use. So this is what it looks like. And it's got a nice flat side on the inside here. It's going to be nice against your wrist to wear, and it looks like this. So if you want to learn how to make this bracelet, then stay tuned. So these are the materials that we'll need to make this bracelet. Now first of all, we need a round Kumihimo disc here because we're making a round braid. And then as for the cord that I'm using, this is a 0.4mm S-lon, and I'm just working with a white colour because the beads that I'm going to use for the main braid are white, so this will be a nice background. And then as for the beads, I'm using these 8/0 seed beads in white as the main part of my braid, along with my SuperDuos here. So both the 8/0s and the SuperDuos are going to create the braid to begin with on the Kumihimo disc. And then the rest of my beads here are going to be the embellishment we're going to add after we made the braid on the disc. So the first ones here are 15/0 seed beads, just in a black colour. And then my bicones, and these are 4mm, and I'm using red ones here. And then once we've finished making the whole braid and the embellishment, we'll need some Kumihimo ends here to finish off the braid with. And then our findings, so extended chain, jump rings and lobster claw clasp is what I'm going to be using. You can use whatever findings you want to. So let's get all the materials together and let's get started. So the cord that we're going to need for this is 4 lengths of our S-lon of about 1 meter each. And then what I've done as well is I found the middle, and then I just put a regular knot to hold them together and signify that midpoint. And then I'll just put a scrap piece of wire here. You can put a piece of cord or a weight, Kumihimo weight, whatever you want to. And we're going to use this to then attach to the disc. So I've now added my cords onto my disc here. So put the midpoint of my cords down through the centre of the disc, and then just put 1 cord on each side of all the dots going all the way around there. So I'm not going to worry about the numbers. And then to get started, what I'm going to do is start with my top left one cord there on that top dot, and then release that, bring it down across the disc, and then down to the left side of the bottom pair. Then grab the right one on the bottom, bring it up, and place it, stay on the right side on the top. And then that's one movement. We need to turn the disc a quarter, so to reach the next pair. Again, I'm grabbing my top left one, release it, bring it down, stay on the left side, and then I'm grabbing my bottom right one, release it, and stay on the right side of the top there. And then again, turn your disc to the next pair, and then we're just going to keep repeating this for a little while, because what we're going to do first, before we start adding in any beads, we're just going to have a little section of braid just with a cord here, about 1 to 2 centimeters, because that's going to help us finish off the braid at the end. And also, I just want to say, it doesn't matter what direction you turn your disc really. So for instance, I just finished this, I will turn it that way. I could also go the other way, that doesn't actually matter when it's an 8-strand braid, but I just do recommend kind of having a habit of turning your disc the same way, just purely for habit, when you start doing other forms of braids as well. So just keep doing this until you have that little section of braid. When you then have that little section of braid just on the back there coming out through the hole in the disc, then what we need to do now is start adding in our beads. So this is then how you want to add your beads onto all your lengths of cord, and I'm just going to go through here how I've done it, but I've also taken a picture of this setup and then posted that on my website. So if you want a bit more detailed look, then go and have a look there. I'll put the link down in the description box below. Now I'm due to take my top left one next and bring that down, and then take my bottom right one and bring that up. So what I need to do is on the top 2 here, and then also on the bottom 2, they have the exact same amount of beads. These are just filled with the 8/0 seed beads, and I have 42 in each of these. And then on the side strands here, you'll be able to see I also have 1 strand on each side that's just filled with 8/0s. You have the same amount on them, so 42 in each of those. And then the final ones here are the bottom one on the right side and the top one on the left side. This is where the kind of more pattern is. So I start off with 1 8/0 and then 1 SuperDuo, 1 8/0, 1 SuperDuo. Continue like that, alternating between the 2 until we get to the end. And on each of these I have 41 beads. So then the amount of beads that I'm using here is going to end up with about a 7 to a 7.5 inch bracelet, depending on what clasp you're using. But what you can do, if you want it longer or shorter, you can add more beads in, or you can take some beads away. Make sure you do an equal amount on all of them and just continue the pattern here, or take beads off. And you just want to make sure you have one bead less on these with your SuperDuos than you do on the rest of them. Now the last thing I just want to mention is that if you work the same way as me, so start with your top left one and bring that down as a first in every step, or if you start with your bottom right one, because those two are exactly the same, then you just set up your beads in the exact same way that I've done here. But if you start with your top right one or your bottom left, what we need to do is just set up the beads a little bit differently. For that, what you need to do is imagine that you have a mirror in front of your disc, and then you need to put your beads on in that mirror image. So what that means is you need to swap over the top two like this. Obviously that doesn't matter because we have the same with the bottom ones, but it's just in principle. Those need to swap places, and they need to swap places, the setup of the beads. Now as for the sides here, the top two will need to swap over the middle of the disc, and the bottom two swap over the middle of the disc as well. That's obviously just the setup of the beads, so you want to set it up like that if you're working the opposite way to me to get the same result. Once you then have all your beads on in this correct order, then what we need to do now is start incorporating all the beads into a braid as we keep making it. So to do that, we just want to continue making our braid. So like I said, my next one is my top left one. The only difference is now every time you release your cord, what you want to do is release one bead as well. And then when it releases the cord, drop the bead all the way down to the middle there. And then it might tuck in by itself, but if not, what you need to do is make sure that the bead goes underneath the cords in the middle. Then bring your cord down. And then take your bottom right one, in my case. Release one bead as you're releasing your cord. Let it drop all the way down to the middle. And make sure it's tucked under the cords there. Like that. And if it pops out, like it just did for me, just make sure you double check and you check along the way that your beads don't pop out from the middle there, because then otherwise your beads will end up on the inside of the braid and not the outside, like we want in this one. Move on to the next pair. Again, release your cord and one bead while you're doing that. Let it drop all the way down, and then continue like this. And what I also just want to say is when you're turning to the next pair, it doesn't matter what direction you turn your disc in, because this is just an 8-strand braid. So if you notice, when I'm turning my disc here next time, I'm turning it this way. This will be the exact same pair we're going to work with as if I'm turning it the other way. So it doesn't matter at all what way you turn it. All I would say is it's kind of a good habit to get in the habit of turning it in the same direction, really, just from other types of braids. But what I also have is a more detailed tutorial that I show how to do beaded Kumihimo if you're not too familiar with it. So it might be worth looking at that first. I'll put a link to that in the description box below. Otherwise you just continue adding in all your beads here until you use them all up. So I've now kept going here and added in all my beads, so I don't have any more left on my cords here. So what we need to do now is go back to making a bit of braid here with just the cord, just like we did in the beginning. So you just keep going with the same braid, just without adding in any beads, to get that little section of 1 to 2 centimeters. I then have my little section of braid now here. So what I want to do is just secure the end of my braid so I can take it securely off the board without my whole braid coming undone. So I'm just going to take the last pair that I just used was these two. So I'm going to take the opposite ones, start with the other pairs, and I'm going to take cords that are diagonally opposite each other here, then cross them over the middle and tie a regular knot and tighten that down right over the end of the braid there. Take the other two cords diagonally opposite each other from the same pairs, tighten your knot right across the end of the braid, and now move on to the other pairs, take diagonally opposite each other, and again just tighten a knot down on the end of the braid. And the same thing with the last ones here, and this just secures it in place without making it too bulky. And once you've done that, we can take it off the board completely. And now what I would do is just put a little bit of glue here on this end just to hold these knots in place, and then also take off the wire if that's what you used on the other end here. But then otherwise here you have the braid. Now when we finish making the braid here and got rid of all the excess cord, what we need to do is start embellishment. So what I've done is I've taken 2 of my beading needles here and thread it onto each end of a length of my S-lon, the thin S-lon thread, and you can really use whatever you feel comfortable with, maybe about an arm span or something like that. So what we need to do now is start attaching this cord to the braid. So I just want to start on one end of my braid here, because what we need to do first is attach this before we can go in and add any embellishments. So I want to go down here where I have that little section of just braid. Before we start getting into where the beads are, just go through this. We just want to anchor this thread in place first. So I'm going through the braid and then I'm just going to put my needles together just to roughly find the middle of the thread here. So like that. And then what I want to do as well is take my needles and just basically work one at a time here, because I just want to go back and forth through the braid just a few times to make it a bit more secure. So just right around, straight back and forth, just through the braid to make it a bit more secure and stable and less likely to break as well and wear over time. So once you've gone back and forth a few times, what I want to start doing now is working my threads down towards where my beads start on the braid. So I'm just going to go back through again to the other side here and then come out right in front of a bead. So I want to go back to the side here with one thread right in front of a bead, the very first bead you really run into. And then I'm just going to take the other thread as well and get that to the opposite side. Because we want our threads, needles basically with the thread there, to be on each side of the braid. Because we're going to work with both needles at the same time, working all the way up along the Kumihimo braid here as we're adding in the embellishment. So like this. So now we have the thread completely attached and it's nice and secure. So what I then want to do is take one needle at a time, and you basically want to then go through the very first bead you're right into, right here. I'm going to go through that because we need to come up to the point where we can start using the SuperDuos. Go through that bead, pull your thread all the way, and then I want to get to basically the next bead, the one that's right across from the very first SuperDuo there. So you're going to have the SuperDuo, 2 beads in front of that, kind of on the side, and then 1 bead next row up, right across from the SuperDuo. That's the one I want to come out of, so go through that as well. So we're going to be straight opposite the SuperDuo and ready for the embellishment here. I'm going to take the other needle, do the same on the other side. Get through your first bead. And then if you can just go through the next one at the same time as well, down at a diagonal. So there we go. We're now in the position where we want to start adding in our embellishment. So this is then where we want to get our 15-0 seed beads out, so the very tiny little ones. I'm just using these black ones. And then what we want to do is where we're at now, we're coming out of that bead and we need to get up into the first SuperDuo. So I'm going to take some 15-0s on my needle here, and I'm going to be using 3 and then go through the SuperDuo, so the open hole there in the SuperDuo, pull it all the way through, and then you can see that's going to basically bridge the gap there. You won't be able to see the thread. Do the same thing on the other side. Put 3 seed beads on your needle and go through the SuperDuo with the unused hole. So like that. So we now bridge that little gap from the beads in the braid up until the SuperDuo, and we can then continue. So this is where we really need to use the 2 different needles to get this pattern going. So to then start making the X's here, what I want to do is pick up 5 of our seed beads on each needle, When you then have your 5 beads on each needle there, then you want to just let them drop down, and then we need to pick up one more bead on one needle, bring it a bit down the cord or the thread, and then you want to cross through that with the other needle in the opposite direction. So get through there like that, and then pull both your threads all the way through so your beads will come right down to where your thread is coming out, and then end up sitting like this. So they're now being connected by that single bead where you cross through. So now we need to add another 5 beads onto each needle, the same that we did before we crossed through. And again, when you have them, your 5 beads, seed beads there in each needle, let them drop down, and then we need to go through the next SuperDuo on each side, so just take one at a time. So the very next SuperDuo there, with the open hole, go through just that one, pull your thread down, and then the other side as well, through the very next SuperDuo. And then just pull your thread through gently, so you don't get caught on anything. And then we're going to tighten it here. And then you just want to make sure when you tighten it that all your beads here are going to sit correctly. So you might just want to kind of pull up the middle a little bit to make your thread settle, and then pull it nice and tight through the SuperDuos. And then it's going to look like this, so a bit like a next. And the bracelet's always going to end up curving a bit, it's going to space it out a bit more. So that's what it's going to be like. So basically what we need to do now is continue doing the same thing. We're now coming out of the next SuperDuo there on each side. So you want to add another 5 beads on each needle to then start making the next X. And again, when you have them, let them drop all the way down. So your 5 on each needle, drop them down, pick up one more on whichever needle, and then pull it down a little bit, go through that with the other needle in the opposite direction, like that. And then gently pull all your thread all the way through, so we can get these beads all the way down to where they're going to sit nice and tight. Again, coming in towards the middle of the braid there. And same as before, we now want to pick up another 5 seed beads on each of our needles to finish off this X. And again, when you have that on each needle, let it drop down, and then just with one at a time go through the very next SuperDuo that's free that we haven't used yet. So we're constantly just working our way up, making X's along the way in between the SuperDuos. Then when we've finished one, we work our way to the very next SuperDuo, using the open holes, unused holes there in the SuperDuos, that's pointing outwards from the braid. Just got my thread caught on something here. Pull it through gently, and then just make sure your beads sit correctly. You can see here they don't sit nicely, so I'm just going to pull up the middle a little bit to make sure my thread sits on the right side and actually forms an X. So just like this, and then pull it out a bit, we can see we're going to have the X's like this. So you want to keep doing this all the way up your braid, filling out the whole distance up onto the other end in between every single set of SuperDuos there, and then I'll show you how we do the next embellishment. So I've now kept going here, adding my beads all along the way until I've filled in every single space between the SuperDuos there, and then I reach the end, and I just want to make sure that all of these are nice and tight, so you don't have anywhere that's too loose where you have thread showing. So if you go back and just double check once you've done this, if you have any looser ones along the way, obviously this is fine if there's movement, but not any obvious thread showing ideally. But if you do have, then just go back and start pulling each one and work your way up. You can just use your needle, pull it up a little bit, tighten it, and then move on to the next one, just until they're all nice and even and tight as well. So they sit like this. So now it's the next step is to again bridge that little gap at the end, just like we did in the beginning with those 3 beads from the very last SuperDuo here. So for that, start with one side. We need to add 3 beads of our seed beads here, the 15 O's, onto one needle on the one side, and then go into the bead in the braid that's straight across from it. So not the first two that's right next to the SuperDuo or in front of, but the next one up. And then you can always go through the next one as well right at the end of the braid, because we just need to get there anyway. So at a diagonal, pull that, and the same with the other side. So get 3 beads onto your needle, and then go from your SuperDuo down to that bead in the braid straight across. Pull through, and also this get to the very end one. Just so we get to the very end here. So now we need to reposition our needles and thread to get back up the sides again, because we now need to add the embellishment down the sides with a bit of colour as well, to make it a little bit more Valentine's if you want to use it for that. So first off, I want to go through the braid here where it's just the cord. Just stay right by where the beads are. Get through with your needle, and you can really just swap them over. If you want, you can go through them a couple of times with the extra security, but we're using the same thread here to go back up the other way again. And this also tightens it up a little bit if you need to, so it holds your seed beads that you've been adding nice and tight. Just like this, go through to the other side. And then before we move on, just give it a nice tug to make sure that all these seed beads, they haven't come loose, and if they have, you just tighten it up like this before we move on, because it'll be much harder to do or near impossible to do later on. So that's what it looks like now. So I'm happy with this, and it's nice and tight all the way. So now what we need to do is get the other beads out as well and start adding them. So I'm getting some more of my 15-0s. I'm still using them because we need to make sure that the spacing is right. So I'm using them here. Get them ready. And then also the beads we also need are the bicones here that I'm going to be working with. And I'm just using these nice red ones to make it Valentine's themed with the excess. So there we go, we now have the beads ready. But first of all, we need to get into position again. So basically, because we're on the other side now, we've swapped over the threads, we can go back up the same way that we came down when we finished this end. So up the same beads, and then you also want to go through those little 15-0s right at the end. If you can do it straight away, by all means. If you can't, then just go through the beads in the braid first and then go through them separately. But I made it through there. Pull it tight, and then go through the SuperDuo as well, but just the SuperDuo, none of the little 15-0s here on the other side, just the SuperDuo. So avoid them. There we go. Now that's in position. Same thing on the other side. Grab your needle. Just make sure it's tightened up here. Go through the beads in the braid. First of all. And then just go up through your 15-0s as well that you connected to the SuperDuo. All 3 of them. And again, same thing through the SuperDuo as well. So that top hole that we were using for the embellishment on the top there, and only the SuperDuo, not the 15-0s on top. So now we're in position again here. We can start adding beads. And again, one last time, I just want to tighten this nicely in case anything has come loose in the meantime while working with it. So there we go. So then the pattern we want to pick up of our beads is between every single space here of the SuperDuos. That's what we want to fill in and get a bit of colour in there as well. I'm going to take one of my 15-0s, then one of my bicones, 4mm ones there, and then another of my 15-0s. So it's these 3 that I'm going to add to my needle. Again, just work with one side at a time. Go from this SuperDuo that you're coming out from, jump over to the next one, avoiding any of these little 15-0 seed beads that we added on the top. Just go through the SuperDuo and pull that through, and then when you pull it, Your little embellishment there is going to sit right on the side, and you can then see that on the tops and bottoms there, the excess. We need to do this all the way up the side. So 1/15-0, 1 bicone and 1/15-0, and jump over to the very next SuperDuo in the top hole and pull all the way through, and then it's going to sit like this. So there we go. So keep up this side, and obviously we want to do exactly the same on the other side as well. So grab the other needle, coming out from the very first SuperDuo, grab 1/15-0, and then 1 bicone and another 15-0. So basically the bicones are caged in by the 15-0s. It just adds in with the right spacing between the SuperDuos here. Jump over to the very next SuperDuo, go through just that and pull it all the way. So there we go. And then it's going to look like this. Continue up both sides, just do one at a time, and we have this nice pop of colour as well along with that excess there. So keep doing this all the way up till the other end. So now that you reach all the way up the other end here on both sides of your braid, adding in your embellishment, then what we need to do is basically just finish this off because it's done otherwise. So I'm exiting out of the last SuperDuo there on each side. So the one side at a time, I'm going to again go through those 3 15-0s that I added to connect from the SuperDuo down to the braid. So go through them, and then again go through the 2 beads in your braid as well, if you can. Otherwise just do a few at a time, because we just need to get down to the braid where it's just the cord to be able to finish off our threads here. So all the way down like this, coming out, and then the same on the other side. So just go through the beads here as well. Because what we're going to do is just tie knots basically, going around that braid and securing off the thread to then be able to finish off the actual full bracelet then afterwards. So come through here, up towards your braid where it's just a cord. Just make sure you don't get caught on anything. There we go. And the last thing I just want to do then is just pull tight. Make sure you got all your beads pulled tight. So just pull gently in your threads here to make sure you pulled them before we start finishing them off. Because if you finish off your thread and you discover, go back and see that there's a bit of loose thread or bead somewhere, obviously by then it's too late. So the way I'm going to finish off my threads, it's going to be the same thing with both of them. I'm just going to go through the braid itself a few times. So just take your needle back and forth. That helps secure the thread as well. It doesn't matter at all how, because it blends in. It's the same colour thread that I'm using as the cord. But also this end is going to then be finished off inside an actual Kumihimo end. So it's going to cover it up as well. So once you've gone through it a few times, what I'm then actually going to do is go through, but then not pull it all the way through. So something like that. Come out, and then I'm going to just pull the tail there. Get that out of the way. Then I'm going to leave a little loop like this and just go through it about twice to basically make a knot. Secure it off, and I want to just do this a couple of times with one thread, back and forth again a few times, and then make another loop in the exact same way. So go through it, push your needle through, and then instead of pulling your thread all the way through, just have that loop there and go through that twice to make another knot, and then pull it tight. So there we go. That's one finished off. You can just cut it off now. You want to do the same thing with the other thread here exactly the same way, and then once you've finished them off, you can just cut off the excess thread, and then all that's left to do is finish off your ends here of the braid with your Kumihimo ends. And I've already got a tutorial that shows how to do that, So I'm going to put a link to that in the description box below the video here. Then once you do that, add your clasp as well, whatever clasp you want to use, and then this will be a finished bracelet. And it's going to sit nicely curved around your wrist like this, with your X's and then embellishment on the side. So go ahead and do that. So when you then added your Kumihimo ends to both ends there, and whatever findings you want to use as well, and let the glue dry of course, then here you have your finished bracelet. And it looks like this. So on one side it's nice and flat and comfortable against the skin, but then you have all your decoration here on this side. And then as we close it up, and it's going to sit like this around your wrist, it's really going to make the X's stand out with the embellishment there on the side. So that's the finished bracelet here. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you very much for watching. Hello everyone. Today I want to show you how to make these beaded Kumihimo earrings using SuperDuos, and they look like this. So you get this nice kind of almost teardrop shape with the braid running all the way through the middle. Then we have the SuperDuos that's then connected, where we then add our embellishment through the SuperDuos as well, and it gives this nice sparkle using those bicones, I think. So these are the earrings, and I've made a whole set to go with this, so you can make a whole set if you want to. This is the bracelet.